Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning into this first episode of what will be a really meaningful series of discussions for a platform that we're going to be calling Discourse from Discord. And this is supposed to be a place for hard discussion to really take place, for substantive discussion to take place. And, you know, for really at the end of the day, whatever one's opinion might be, for good discourse to prevail. This has been something that's been in the works for quite some time in different forms. This is the 2019 going on 2020 version of, again, what'll be a really great and important platform for discussion in a really precarious time in the world today. So just to introduce myself, my name is Scout Hartley. I am a consultant and legislative aide, and I do want to just say that the opinions expressed on this show by me are of myself, and they do not represent the organizations or individuals that I work on behalf of. So this is, again, had begun as an idea between myself and some friends as a Facebook group, and now here we are today. I'm going to pass it along to my intellectual better half, the person who's been with me from the start from this, Mike.
I prefer to think of you as a partner in crime. My name's Michael Favada. I'm a fellow co-founder with Scout of The Reason Vegan. We do a podcast sometimes over there. And we worked on what in some ways was a previous incarnation of this idea on Spread Your Mind. That was a Facebook group. It's a great name that you got from a graffiti artist tag somewhere in the Howell, New Jersey area, Howell, Jackson, where we hail from. And that too was an experiment in conversation. That was text form, kind of just a group of people on Facebook. And this is that too. I think hopefully it'll be a little bit more focused and professional. We just want to take a group of smart people who have differing opinions on weighty issues and kind of get them to think out loud. We're still not 100% sure if it's more like the debate model or the conversation model, but we're leaning towards conversation where people are just being completely intellectually honest, not trying to hide the flaws in their own opinions, and just trying to really make sense of an issue. And I think there's a lot of hunger for that in today's hyper-partisan world where everyone just wants to shout down the other side. And so that's what we hope to bring you all. I'll pass it along to Tyler. I guess we'll go in vertical order from what I'm seeing.
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name is Tyler Osborne Lomax, old friend of Scouts from community college days. Currently, just graduated from Stockton University, wannabe journalist, local papers that I've worked with, internships and whatnot, trying to develop a career there. Generally, my concerns for discourse and democracy kind of stem from a philosophy of like John Locke. Democracy is an active endeavor that needs to be taken every day. I'm hoping through this platform that I'll be able to do that with my friends and come to a consensus on a range of issues. Yeah, that's, I think, all that I can muster at the moment. So, okay, John?
So I am also a Stockton University graduate. I have a degree in history and literature, and I now work in sales. I consider myself a strategist or jack of all trades. So when it comes to the media, pretty much all the news and information that people are getting these days, everything is so charged and one-sided. It's not even hidden that it's one-sided. So I think this is a great opportunity to discuss facts and opinions and kind of maybe not run down the rabbit hole so much, but really discuss things in detail and try to figure out kind of what's really going on and where everything's going. And the strategist part of me really likes to address these things.
Yeah, and there are a few others of us who will be intermittently in some episodes and in some discussions. But this is kind of like the core group who's been engaged for a long period of time and really dedicated to the pursuit of good, healthy discourse. And I want to just touch on something just to kind of, as a way of leveling out the importance of something like this. John, you had referred to some media issues. I think that I had mentioned also some precarious times that we live in. This is a very interesting and somewhat weird time to be living in, to say the least, where even just finding a good place for a discussion with reliable, what we can come close to as objective information is really hard. It requires a lot of digging, and people often aren't careful about how they approach arguments. That's kind of what we hope to counter here on this show, and really demonstrate that you can really sift through the noise, get to the facts, or at least have some agreement on a basic set of facts, and move forward in some productive and meaningful way.
Yeah, there's a guy named Eric Weinstein who's part of what some people have termed the intellectual dark web. I'm a big fan of him and people like him and Sam Harris. And the way he frames this is that our sense-making apparatuses have broken down, that the way in which people have traditionally made sense of the world through news, through books, through other organizations, are just, they're no longer making sense. They're short-circuiting. You're either on one side of the fence or the other. And we set ourselves an admittedly lofty goal in trying to overcome that problem. But I think that when we take people who are honestly reasoning, who are not just trying to cheerlead for one side or the other, and we represent both sides of an issue, if we can do, a brief but still deep dive into, some controversial issue of the day, that we can get hopefully closer to the truth and model some form of good discourse, which is really, I think, the biggest thing we can hope for is just to model good discourse, because there is so much, I see so many poor arguments, so many logical fallacies, false equivalence, just arguing in bad faith. And that really, it destroys the sense-making apparatus, and it just leaves people completely confused, and it makes people throw their hands up, and it makes people worse citizens, and it makes our democracy break down.
Yeah, as we are seeing, I think it's a nonpartisan, pretty objective thing to say, that we are in an age where we're questioning the truth, and people are questioning the very foundation of our democracy, and without explicitly getting political, we're seeing the core institution of our government tested right now. So it's incredibly important that we be able to take a step back and give all perspective that deserve the credibility, or I should say deserve the spotlight, give with the caveat that they have a certain level of credibility. Which is something that we will discuss on this show, throughout these episodes also. What establishes credibility, the structure of an argument, those kinds of formal things that you mentioned, Mike. But yeah, and John, I actually want to go back to this too, because I know you're kind of going to be, for me, that a way to recognize the importance of different perspectives. Because I know you and I don't always agree or may share different opinions in some fashion. But as we demonstrate in our informal discussions, and as we will hear, in spite of that, we can still move forward with some agreement of what the case is and how to move forward. I'm curious for your thoughts.
Right. So we're not trying to convince one another that our idea is right and your idea is wrong. Pretty much we're just here to discuss facts, raise points, and have counterpoints. We're not, again, there may not be a right answer, but we're trying to raise the pros and cons of each to let our viewers decide what they like. So maybe there's something somebody hadn't considered and it might change their mind. Or at the same time, they might discount it entirely and continue to think what they think. And that's perfectly okay too, as long as they have, an idea that there's more out there than maybe one opinion, or maybe there's information that they didn't know and it helps them in the long run.
And Tyler, you had mentioned some, I think, one or two philosophers that are important for thinking about politics and government. But I wonder if you can talk about a little bit the role of philosophy, because I remember we had some really interesting discussions those years ago when we first met about the role of philosophy in discussions.
Well, one, for instance, like I mentioned earlier, John Stuart Mill really informed a lot of my understanding of at least the idealistic, lofty goals of democracy and the way we hope that it works. I think since that time, I've gotten through a lot of like the research that I've been able to read about in my political science degree. It has really made me question a lot of that, and actually, it's a fascinating topic. I hope we can get into in the future, as to why democracy doesn't it's seeming to like shut down in this age. There's a really interesting book called Democracy for Realists that came out, I think, maybe 2016 or 2017. I can't remember. Just to summarize it a little bit, it seems that in a lot of instances, the nature of people is just to be very tribal, in a very simplistic way. That's my understanding of it. And I'd love to like see if through the purposes of this podcast or YouTube series, like, can we get past that? Is there mechanisms that we can use? And I believe in an idealistic way that it might be discourse. There's other philosophers that can guide us through this, and hoping that I can supplement a lot of arguments about democracy or dissent or political action in some sort of way by taking a close reading of these individuals, understanding the context and the lives that they led. I think that would be really important because, you know, they're obviously extraordinarily smart individuals, and might be able to, you know, give us good guidance.
And from that philosophical point of view, I'd like to bring up kind of more of a pragmatic view where we kind of discuss why people do certain things and how sometimes it's illogical, but it's the right thing to do as far as how they feel and how they might think in a certain way. So when you say that, you know, people tend to be very tribal, it's evident everywhere. And that may or may not be pragmatic. And I think that's something that we can discuss as well.
No, I think that's really interesting. I actually think that those two components are part of the same vein of a certain argument, I might think, where we are, we're not rational actors. You know, we kind of have these sometimes irrational, sometimes impulsive behaviors. And then we kind of act first and try to rationalize afterwards. And we come up with our explanations for our feeling. But at the same time, we are also predisposed. I think this is kind of clear through an understanding of evolution in some fashion that some of those remnants, those physiological, biological remnants of constantly having to survive in the nitty-gritty of nature, that we are not as evolved or sophisticated as we think ourselves to be. Or maybe we are. Maybe we are more intelligent or sophisticated, because I think as much progress as we have seen, Tyler, like you suggest, I mean, the democracy is not just being, this is a global trend of what I call it's what's called disestablishmentarianism, where citizens in various countries in the world are having populist uprisings that are disrupting and sometimes dismantling institutions, whether that be domestic governments or international systems. And I think it's just a very this is a very interesting time where we're questioning the very paradigm that we've been living under. And that's the environment we live in also with information. And it becomes very interesting. And I think that when we look at this glut of information on the internet, I believe that philosophy is the answer. And it doesn't have to be some erudite assessment of who wrote what and when, or something like that necessarily. I call myself a pretend philosopher because I think I have these tinges, but I'm not well read. By no means. I'm quite illiterate when it comes to philosophy, I'm sure. But I don't know. This is something Mike and I go back and forth about a lot too.
Yeah, I want to bring into play, because we're talking a lot about the stakes for democracy. I want to bring into play that after the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, there was a book by Francis Fukuyama called The End of History. And there was a sense that, okay, things are going to just kind of gel and settle. And we are witnessing a time where we don't have to go through civil wars and, mass uprisings, that things are going to stabilize, and, the first world will stay rich and prosperous. And it's really the end of what we call history, this tumultuous thing that is history. And we're really seeing, I think, kind of a repudiation of that book in the contemporary environment, where we are all so worried about it. And we all feel like, no, we're definitely still in history. Things are, in fact, precarious.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
So coming from a tactician standpoint, sorry about that.
Mm-hmm.
We're at a time where the balance of power is still balanced between governments and people. The climate in China right now is a little bit more turbulent. The balance of power is certainly more in the government's favor than in the people's favor, and they are exercising that power, and it's become known on a global scale at this point. So that may fall back into the turbulence, that cycle of history that you're talking about. As for, say, Russia and the United States, and of course the EU, also first world countries, I feel that the balance between people and government, that balance of power, is still pretty well balanced. So we may or may not be breaking out of that cycle. Only the future can tell.
I mean,
But-
I'm sorry, just to say,
Mhm.
as a quick retort is, I think with the EU, I think that Brexit has really kind of caused some angst and consternation in the EU, where certain countries are trying to, who are dealing with those populist uprisings, who are trying to get out of the EU, or in the case of Hungary, whose EU membership is being threatened by a new leader. I think that, I think that these institutions are being questioned in ways that I don't think that anyone expected them to be questioned. And it's very subtle right now, because it's kind of like on a very macro level. But I do believe that there's some dark thing in the future that might happen if we don't really get ahead of fake news and really bad discussions and charged political times. But again, I'm a very cynical person, but
I think we all agree with that. I just want to jump in. It is the enemy that you described, Tyler. It is tribalism that is the common denominator in all of these things that emotionally hijack us in a way where we can't determine what is the best way to live. What is the best way to structure society where we can be prosperous and do what we need to do, live a healthy, happy, prosperous life, and support that for a global population, and be disease-free, healthy, happy, have water, have food, have all the essentials, reach some kind of peak on the moral landscape, to use kind of Sam Harris's language. It is tribalism that prevents that, because it's not like filling potholes. Like they say in local politics, there's no Republican or Democrat way to fill a pothole. You just attack the problem in the most pragmatic way. I think tribalism prevents that, and it prevents us from changing our mind in the face of evidence. There's the backfire effect, where if you're presented with evidence, it might strengthen your opinion in the opposite way against the evidence. So this show is meant to combat that by modeling good disagreement, and hopefully with open arms embracing changing your own mind, breaking out of the tribalist mindset and trying to be as not wrong, trying to be wrong for as short a period as possible so that you can be educated and we can arrive at some greater consensus.
I think to that end, admitting that you're wrong is a big component. Where I always have this reflex when I listen to certain political pundits. I think that there's a lot of examples on the political right, but just so I'm fair, there are also examples on the political left. I think Bill Press is a politically left pundit who just has this assumption, this constant MO, for lack of a better way of putting it, that he's just always right. He's just so right, and he's not prepared to be wrong because he's right. And I just see so much of that. And to me, I think a position like that in this day and age is incredible because we have so much information and so much emerging science where I have no choice almost but to say that I don't know that much. That's one of the whole purposes of referring to myself as the pretend philosopher. Yet at the same time as we're dealing with all this information, we have people who are so self-assured. This is where I think a lot of discussion is. And I think, Mike, like you had mentioned, getting to a point where you can disagree reasonably. I know you didn't say that explicitly, but where you can disagree reasonably.
And I think
that's very important.
I think the even harder thing is to openly change your mind. Though that is like the ultimate. That is the Buddha level.
I do it all the time. I've changed positions majorly just in the last few years. I wasn't a social justice warrior 5 years ago. I wasn't a Bernie Sanders supporter until the very end of the 2016 election, after he already lost the nomination. Convinced of things every day to this day. I change my mind on matters. That's how we should be. We should be flexible with the evidence and the information at hand.
I agree. But it's not sexy. And I don't know how overcomable that problem is, unfortunately. There's an old quote about how like the smartest people, the thrust of it is the smartest people are the most unsure of themselves. And the dumbest people are the most sure of themselves, ironically. Probably Mark Twain or something. But unfortunately, it's kind of sexy to be like really sure of yourself. And a lot of the best pundits and the best debaters are like that. By the way, we did lose Tyler.
Yeah. I'm looking now. I'm trying to adjust that. But I'm sure he'll join because he has the invitation.
Yeah.
But
we should be close to wrapping too.
So, John, I'm curious actually if you have any thoughts about that. Because I feel like that's an impression I've never really. You're very good at qualifying things. I think that's one thing I've always appreciated about you over the years, where you're. Some people don't seem to have an internal understanding of what they don't know and how to kind of integrate that into their arguments. And I feel like you do. Like you know what you don't know, and you really kind of put that out there at the same time as you make your argument about what you think you know. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying.
It's kind of like word salad, but
I try to learn as much as I can because anything that I can't bring up instantly in an argument, I clearly don't know it. But to work backwards from here, so I agree. Everybody should have the flexibility to change their opinion because nobody knows all of the information. But I feel like where I have a different set or a different standpoint than you and Michael is I think, I suppose cynically in my own aspect, where I feel like that, excuse me, let me clarify. So one of the founding fathers actually quoted, if I could remember which one, that laws were created because humans cannot govern themselves morally, something along those lines. So a world where everybody was able to follow morality, to follow their morals and do the right thing, I personally think is impossible. And part of that leads to the tribal mentality. We all have a little bit of prejudice. It's just human nature. We can't escape human nature. For example, sports fans. If you are a Giants fan, you probably don't like Cowboys fans, and vice versa. You have nothing against that person until you find out that they support the opposite team. Then all of a sudden you have something against that person. That's tribal mentality. That's just basic human nature and tribalism. And I feel like it's almost impossible to get around that. So the only solution is to try to meet in the middle, both philosophically and pragmatically. Where can we make things work? And how would we like things to be? And how can we meet in the middle?
Mm-hmm. And hopefully tribalism is the sort of thing that can be turned on and off in different capacities. Obviously, the sort of tribalism of the sports fan is, I think, a pretty harmless pastime. But when it's applied to broader points about identity, you know, it is my identity to be on the opposite team of you ideologically in terms of how the world should be run. And to give you an inch would be to deny who I am at my very core.
So
that's the problem.
That's what I wanted to draw out, just briefly, if I may. I think that I often wonder at my core if questioning these things about what we call human nature. So I think what we would agree is that human nature, part of that is tribalism, and part of that is kind of, I would argue, at least, I don't know if you both would agree, but part of human nature is having that kind of acting of act first, reason later. You know, you come up with your rational explanation for something that you feel after you have that feeling. These are kind of like non-rational, I don't know how to describe them, except kind of to say like, very like base. Like it's not very like intellectual or thoughtful, perhaps, I would say, right? But like the point really is, I don't know how comfortable I am all the time with trying to change those things that are kind of in our nature. I don't know why. It's just kind of like a reflex where it's like, I don't know. Do we want to go down that road? Because in the last few years, kind of another way that I've changed is that I used to be very rational to the point where I almost acted like a computer. And like I was very stoic, and I even got to a point where I said to my partner that I didn't view her any differently than any other individual because I thought that we should all view every individual the same.
Do not try this at home with your girlfriend, kids.
No, that's a bad idea on every front.
Yes, and it was bad for a long time, but I insisted. And over time, I evolved in a way, and I started to understand something new. And I have this deep belief that our understanding of what it means to be us and what it means to be human and be alive and in the world, a lot of that is really inextricably linked with those non-rational feeling kind of things. I don't know if I want to lose that or if I want to question that. That's something for another day. But
I didn't mean to interrupt. I kind of have an answer for that. So what we see as a leader is really somebody who comes up with an idea that a lot of people kind of agree with. They came up with it and were confident about it first. So because they were confident, we follow them because, hey, we agree with that idea. So there they go. And then they come up with another idea and we kind of agree with that. So we follow it because, well, they came up with it first. Soon we stop having ideas of our own or voicing ideas of our own, and we follow the leader. And this is pretty much where tribalism starts and ends. And as far as being 100% pragmatic and having absolutely no emotions involved, well, that's a terrible tactical decision because everybody has emotions except those who are psychologically different.
yeah, I guess I just struggle with where that line is. But I think that we are right to question tribalism in the least.
Yeah.
Because tribalism has toxic effects.
you might be committed to the idea that tribalism is such a dominating part of human psychology that when we try to live as a global village, we will encounter a lot of problems. And we are encountering a lot of problems with that task. But I think you sort of don't have anywhere else to go. You don't have any other resources. Even if you think it's a futile endeavor, I think it's a noble endeavor and sort of like the only battle you can fight once it's clear that tribalism is one of your main enemies that's hijacking your conversation and preventing you from solving issues in a clear-eyed way. We just have to roll the dice, even if, we think it's kind of a futile task.
So the difference between psychological tribalism and social tribalism lies pretty much here. So social tribalism, if we were to try to survive on our own, that's really difficult to do. We need to find food. We need to maintain shelter. We need to maintain heat. It's an all-day endeavor. It's very difficult. But if you have enough people to split those responsibilities up into groups, well, then we're all going to have a much easier time of surviving. But it gets to the point where there's more people than are necessary. And all of a sudden, people have extra time. There needs to be resources for development. And then all of a sudden, it turns into, well, who's getting favored? Who's getting more food? Who's getting more resources? And why? And then it expands from there. Fast forward a couple thousand years and a few thousand years, and here we are in a contemporary first world country where we don't have to try to survive. We have to make enough money to buy the things that we need to survive, and the rest of the time we have, we could do this. We could talk about whatever we want. And just as a side note, we're all humans here, and by no means are we 100% educated on every topic that we're discussing. So obviously there's room for debate, there's room for negotiation, and there's room to think about what we're talking about, not just following what we say. And that's pretty much what I think our goal is.
Yeah, I think it works against us as kind of intellectual guys that there's a social pressure just to be able to say something smart and to have a completely formed opinion on every topic under the sun. You want to have your cocktail party repartee or something like that. Not that that makes it sound like we're elites or something, but there's some kind of social pressure among smart guys like us who want to have a reasoned understanding of poverty and be able to explain sociologically our opinions. But like, there's stuff I don't know about, and like, we should be okay with that and just be honest about how we have like maybe gut feelings about something like that. But we'll lean back in those situations.
So I really want to dedicate like a whole episode to this subject because that again, like I keep going back to this pretend philosopher thing. It's not just a clever shtick. It's actually a really meaningful title that I ascribe to myself. And part of that is rooted in the belief that we live in a very technical, information-rich world where in order to know something, like to quote-unquote know something, it's actually a very hefty task. And you have to have a lot of information and, some deep contextual or technical understanding of a subject. It's actually very hard. And, I'm a pretend philosopher because I do the best that I can with the little formal knowledge that I have. I'm a pretend sociologist. I'm a pretend statistician. Every time I read a political poll about how Democratic primary candidates are doing, and then there are areas where I know I'm an expert in or that I know I'm qualified in, and we have each of our own. But it's true. I think that at the end of the day, that's a very strong feature of what it means to be, maybe what I'll say, wise for if I'm going to be grandiose, but at least just to be reasonable. You need to be able to know what you know, to know what you don't know, and to be clear and careful about the difference. And that's okay. It's okay to not know things, or it's okay to make an argument that's not as strong, but really clear. You don't have to make the most vociferous argument if you don't have all the information at hand. It's still okay to argue for something, You just have to tailor the structure of your argument towards the information that you have. Right? That's like a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's incredibly important to point out. Because again, I mean, this is a crazy world, and there's homelessness, there's child welfare, there's nuclear technology, there's climate change, there's social justice, there's all these different things. How no one knows it all. It's impossible.
Yeah.
For anyone who thinks that they do, like Ben Shapiro, I will call him out by name because he is someone who does this constantly, irrespective of his beliefs. He is someone who walks around thinking that he read the book on life. I think that is it is the opposite of how we should act. And excuse me for getting loud, but this subject makes me energized.
Can I make 2 quick points? First, shout out to Kool-Aid, who I think influenced you a lot.
Yeah.
And me too. Kool-Aid is this great rapper.
Yes.
He's half of Das Racist. And he has this very postmodern approach to truth where he can be like incredibly passionate and politically engaged 1 minute, and then like just saying, I'm an idiot, I don't know anything the next. And
yes,
he has this view of epistemology where it's like, I don't know, I'm just a dummy. But, I'm still willing to be passionate and have my views too. So shout out to him, first of all. And then secondly, I want to return to tribalism real quick with what you were saying, John, where tribalism is not like, I want to be careful that we don't make it a boogeyman too, because it's like, it's the reason you care for your kids over some stranger's kids.
I guess that's what I was thinking in the back of my head. I didn't articulate it that way, but yeah. Continue.
Yeah, I mean, there's a vision of maybe the world would be great if we were 7 billion people that walked around like we were on ecstasy all day, or we were like Buddhist monks where we loved everyone equally, and I wouldn't pay any particular attention. Maybe my wife and like the woman on the street are equally amazing because I'm living completely in the moment and I'm enlightened in some way. Maybe that would be a great software update for everyone on the world. I somehow don't think so. I think we like the world, which is tribal to the extent that I have like a first tier sense of obligation to, spouse, kids, parents, and then slightly lower is like close friends, and go down the list. And then your sports team, your nation, your school, your social club, your political affiliation, you have all of these tribal allegiances, and you have to be a person is to balance all of these different aspects of yourself and all these different tribal allegiances. And that's a complicated task, and we have to find a way where we can balance that. One way is a kind of nationalistic sense of citizenship. There's a book, Mark Lilla, The Once and Future Liberal, where he proposes that liberals should have a really ingrained sense of like patriotism and allegiance to what it means to be an American citizen, and that's important to us, and that could be a unifying force. So I just want to share that about tribalism.
No, I'm proud to be an American. I question it's I guess it depends on what day you ask me, but today I'm proud to be an American. And I also I do agree with that. But yeah.
As a woke social justice warrior, I don't know if you can be proud to be an American fully. Shouldn't you be self-flagellating?
Yeah. I can talk out of both sides of my mouth at least, because I really do think you can kind of like walk the line between the two. I don't think that they're truly like one or
mutually
the other.
Exclusive. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's something more meaningful for another episode. I think for now, we should kind of just like wrap up by talking about moving forward what we should expect from this show. So I think I'm picking up some vibes that we're going to be hearing an episode about tribalism.
That's fair.
I think that one thing I really want to kind of like nail down is a strong discussion about media literacy and epistemology, because I think that it's really hard, it's really easy to get sucked into a rabbit hole of information and not know where you're about to end up. So part of being reasonable is being equipped with the information. So that'll be one part of it. We've talked about other things informally. I don't know, John or Mike, if you have any things that you want to point out. I know you've mentioned a few in the past.
I think this was just an overarching view of the philosophy, and we'll have different topics, some topical, some evergreen. You know, our audience will have to wait.
Yeah, I mean, and as this thing moves forward, the one thing I will say is that I just really look forward to becoming a real voice for what good discussion should look like. I can go on and on and on, and I will not, to respect everyone's time, but the stakes are very grave, and it's vital that we set an example and really move forward with good, substantive, thorough, and respectful and reasonable discussion. So I look forward to doing that with you all, and for all of our other partners who will join us on future episodes.
And I just want to point out that everything is based on perspective. All opinions are based on perspective. I'm proud to be an American. I think we have one of the greatest countries in the world. And as a social justice warrior, you may or may not be proud to be an American at times, but based on perspective, if you head west to the eastern countries, you'll remember that maybe America's pretty great. Again, it's all based on perspective. It's where you're from, what you're comparing everything to. And second of all, ask questions. Question everything. If somebody has a different opinion than you, instead of trying to convince them that your opinion's better or correct, ask them why they have their opinion and go from there.
I love that. It's just like in conversation. Don't wait for your own turn to talk. Take in what the other person is saying. Same kind of principle. Good closing thoughts. I think that about wraps us up.
All right, everyone. So stay tuned for our next episode. And thanks for tuning in this episode. Have a great day, or whatever time of the day it is where you are.
Yeah, I'm just going to say good night.